Let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of Atlassian's remote webinar week. Today is all about IT service management and how remote work has impacted IT and support teams. I'm Molly Bronstein, and I'm a senior product marketing manager on the ITSM team. And I'm really excited because today I'll be conducting a Q&A session with Jenna Cline, Atlassian's head of IT strategy and planning. And I'll let Jenna introduce herself in just a minute, but just a few housekeeping items first. You can interact with us by asking questions throughout the webinar, and you'll find the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. After the session, we'll open it up to questions from the audience, so feel free to submit those questions for Jenna throughout the webinar, and we'll get to them at the end. For folks who can't stay for the whole webinar today, that's okay. This session will be available on demand. So let's go ahead and get started. Hi, Jenna. Thanks for waiting. Why don't we start by telling the audience a little bit about your background and your role at Atlassian, and then maybe some of your previous experience.
Yeah, awesome. Hi, thanks everyone for joining. I'm super excited you're taking the time out today to listen to a Q&A from Molly and I. So a little bit about me. My role or my title is head of IT strategy and planning, which I always think sounds way more important than it actually is. In fact, my bio sounds great. I use a strategic and programmatic approach for solving business problems with technical solutions. I would say that's mostly true. What I do is I work with our CIO and staff to make sure that IT people are working on the right things at the right time. This includes things like managing our fiscal planning processes, our governance structure, our workforce planning, and vendor management. And now, of course, we're doing all of that remotely. So I've worked in IT and the tech industry probably for more years than I'd like to admit right now. I've done a variety of roles in communications and IT, ranging from early stage startups to Fortune 100 companies. This includes most recently serving as a senior director for the CIO and his chief of staff at Veritas. I was the director of technology and communications change management for Gap Inc. and managed an IT portfolio for Cisco IT.
Perfect. Thanks for that intro. So I'm curious about how you and the IT organization reacted when we first learned that we'd all be working from home with just a couple of days' notice. Can you tell me what was going through your head and what sort of reactions you heard from the rest of the team?
Yeah, sure. But first, I'm going to take a minute to publicly recognize our amazing workplace tech team. Workplace tech, along with Atlassian's other wonderful COVID-19 response teams, have been on the front line of so many processes and have had such rapid and disruptive change. And they are supporting us through all of our questions, helping us adjust as we settle into a new routine, and just been doing an amazing job supporting a 100% remote workforce. So shout out to that team, awesome job. But what's been going through my head as an IT leader during the past 5 or 6 weeks, to that part of your question, is really thinking about how much time we would have spent planning for something like this. So planning's in my day job. Running programs is what we do in IT. And I've been thinking that if the company would have been contemplating moving to a 100% remote workforce or work from home model, what kind of timeline would we have proposed in IT? And there's so many things that we would have had to consider as part of that, just thinking through the scenarios that we would have to support, onboarding new employees or managing a quarter-end close process. So thinking of all the things we had to think about as an IT project, if this was coming to us as an IT project, how long would we have spent to plan and implement something like this? 12 months, 18 months, probably minimum. And it's then that I realize how much we are asking people to change and take on immediately. And so I really think as IT leaders, we should acknowledge to ourselves and with our teams that this isn't easy, and give ourselves a break, recognize the stress this is putting on us and our teams. with the added stress of worrying about health and family worries too. So this may not be our new normal, or this may be our new normal, but it's certainly not normal. And it's still very, very new. So have patience with yourselves and your coworkers. Take a minute to pause and breathe. But then get back to work, because IT teams around the world are at the center of this change. That's what I've been thinking about recently.
No, definitely. And I'm sure many of the audience members listening had very similar feelings and experiences, because this was a huge change for really the whole workforce. Can you talk a little bit through more of how the Atlassian IT team actually approached supporting a 100% remote workforce?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, at Atlassian, our workplace tech team jumped into action and helped our teams convert to a totally remote workforce in a matter of days. In some sites, actually a matter of hours. But how we were able to do it in days and without too many hiccups, although the workplace tech team would totally disagree with me on that, was because of the change management approach that we have been developing over the last 2 years. So within an enterprise, IT leaders get the importance of managing change. We roll out new technology every day, and we have learned the hard way that sometimes, although the technology can be super complex, the real challenge is often managing the change impact on the people who will use the technology and the processes that they run through it. So to make sure that we're not just successful in managing a technology change in IT, our IT leaders think through 3 aspects when we deploy new capabilities. We think about the people, the process, and the technology. And we think about all 3 of those things at the same time.
Okay, well, can you tell me a little bit more what you mean by that, and by people, process, and technology, and maybe some of the policies that were enacted for remote work?
Sure. First, people are our number 1 priority, and not just in this situation. Building good relationships is in our DNA at Atlassian IT, and we have a history of working super closely with our business partners. That history and that relationship that we've developed has allowed us to pivot with them as we make these changes. So for example, I mentioned the onboarding new employees process. We never stopped onboarding new employees and bringing on our new hires, but we had to rapidly make that experience 100% virtual. And that happened with a tight partnership between our workplace tech team, our people technology team, as well as our HR team, our people team, we call them. Just for example, last week we onboarded 150 new employees globally, and the experience was 100% virtual. And we do satisfaction surveys with those at the end of the week. And our satisfaction surveys are actually up since switching to remote versus when we used to do them in person. So that only happened because we had that relationship in place, and we've been allowed to, or we've worked on that in order to pivot to these changes. But we're also doing things like making sure that our people are staying in touch more frequently. Most of our teams are now increasing their interaction by doing daily stand-ups, especially in our project teams and our critical projects. The rapid change has created a lot of pressure for IT teams, and I really think you can't over-communicate right now, both within IT and with our business partners. So keeping our IT leadership connected has been critical. It's helped us maintain consistent and accurate information, because so much changes every day. So I want to make sure everybody's on the same page, everybody's got the same information in IT, so that we can cascade as needed those critical elements. So to do that, we're meeting weekly with over 50 IT leaders. We're also rotating site-specific Ask Me Anythings with our CIO and her staff, because we've found that within our IT teams, concerns can be really hyper-local. So what one IT team in a certain geography might have questions about, is very different from what another IT team has, as countries are navigating the situation differently. So we're giving them the chance to have an interaction with all of us to be able to answer their questions. And then the second part of that is process. So our processes are just as important as people, because we're going to be moving and doing things now completely remotely. So IT has had to learn how to adapt quickly to make sure our employees were up and running as possible. We had to change our support too, because we were getting more support. There was a lot of tickets coming in and questions being asked. So what we did is, as questions were coming in that we could answer consistently, we turned those into policies so that we had a blanket policy turned up and communicated quickly to answer questions that any managers might be getting. For example, we had so many engineers that wanted the multiple monitors at home because that's how they were used to working. And we had other work from home setup requirements as well that we just turned it into a $500 reimbursement for employees to get their home set up as effective as possible. With our business partners, I mentioned that relationship allowed us to move quickly. We were able to also focus on what's super important right now by ruthlessly prioritizing what we needed to do versus, what can we do, and et cetera. Shortly after we went remote, our finance tech team had to support our quarter end close process. And that is a lot of work under ideal circumstances. And our team made it happen completely remotely for the first time. They learned a lot on the way, but what we're doing is capturing the things that we learned, what worked and what didn't, so that of course we can do this again. And we can develop best practices, because anything that we're doing remotely also is applicable to our global teams and any global team processes that we have. And then last is the technology piece. So this really tested our systems capacity, how we use our tools, those kind of things. For example, we host a weekly town hall, we call it, which is a all company meeting. And it's typically virtual and in person, but of course it's now totally virtual. And we saw within the first week that the attendance during that live broadcast quadrupled. Actually, more than quadrupled. So making sure that we were able to support that kind of load. We also used our own tools as much as possible to keep that communication going. So we created with the corporate communications team, we were hosting a Confluence page with official communication between IT, our workplace experience, our HR, and our communications teams. And we used Jira Service Desk to take in questions so that everybody who was on the rapid response team were assigned questions, and those questions turned into answers and they got distributed. We also, because of that support model, had to scale up pretty quickly and go 24/7. We moved to also include supporting over chat where it was appropriate, leveraging Ops Genie, and increasing our geographic rotation within the support team so that we're able to support teams really quickly and around the world all the time. And then sometimes with the tech, we had to get a little creative. The onboarding team had a bunch of laptops that needed to get provisioned to new hires. We got sent home pretty rapidly on one site. So literally one of our IT guys had to load up a bunch of laptops in his car, take him home, turn his apartment into a virtual distribution center, which, not super innovative, but it was pretty funny. And it also tested the suspension of his car. It was a lot of laptops. But we're thinking of all three of those things, and that helps us address the change. It's not just, do they have a laptop, but are they supported? Are the processes they're going to run on that supported? Is everybody on the same page with how we're communicating about this? Has helped us pivot on that change.
Right. That makes sense. I hope that was really great. I hope the audience got a good sense of kind of how the team thinks about, people, process, and technology. One thing I want to go back to, so you mentioned before that switching to a 100% workforce might have taken at least a year to plan and implement. Yeah. Can you tell me why you think Atlassian was able to do this relatively smoothly in such a short amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, I really think under normal timelines, this would have taken at least a year to make this happen if we were trying to plan for every contingency, which is, of course, what IT people do. So we did it really rapidly, and looking back, there's things that we would do again, or things that we wouldn't do. And then there's things that worked out really well, and we're already talking about baking those into our regular run the business kind of activities. I do think Atlassian IT was in a good position to do this for a few reasons. The first is just looking back over the last few years, our CIO has invested a lot of work into pivoting IT into being more of a modern IT team. And what I mean by that is that we've built tight relationships across different functions. In fact, we redid our org structure to directly support the business structure at Atlassian. We've built a lot of operational muscle, and including better and stronger agile practices and planning that helps us be able to adapt to change pretty quickly. And we always, like I mentioned above, consider the change management needed. So it's not just successes and just going live. Successes, did we achieve the business outcome that we needed to achieve with what we're trying to do in IT? That modern IT approach, I think, has really helped us manage this transition relatively easily. Of course, we're still figuring it out, but it was relatively easy. The second thing I think helped us out was that we have a little bit of experience supporting remote work. So we were already supporting a pretty large work from home population of about 10 to 12%, I think, of our employees at Atlassian. Excuse me, my allergies are terrible right now. About 10 to 12% of the population was full-time remote. So we had some experience in what that meant to support those, and then we had the systems in place to do that. Supporting 100% remote workforce, now that's a whole different level, and doing it while trying to figure out how to be remote ourselves in IT, that was a big change. The lessons we've had over the years about supporting remote workers has helped quite a bit. And the third thing I'll mention is global processes and teams. And I do think we've had some of the change happen pretty easily because we've already done the hard work of shifting some of our work to a very distributed global environment. So the processes around how we prioritize work, how we manage developments and release, we've been doing those across time zones and geographies for a while. This certainly amplified it. And in some cases, it forced us to sharpen our approach and use a true follow the sun model for our work to make sure that things are going relatively smoothly. But those are the big three, I think, that helped set us up for this.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I do think Atlassian was in a really great position to manage all of this change, but it sounds like you did learn a lot in the process. What are some of the things that really helped your team be successful at supporting remote work that you want to continue doing?
Yeah, so some things that we have been doing are suddenly becoming even more critical. Specifically, some of the things we've been working on actually have become more critical, and I think we'll double down on some of these things over the next year. We've already been talking about some of this because we are in the middle of our fiscal year planning right now. But one of those is investing in automation. So last year we carved out investments to allow IT to incubate new ideas. In fact, about 5% of our IT investment portfolio went to just incubating new ideas. One of those last year was building out an intelligent automation team. And they pretty quickly proved their value when we set up that incubation team. But because we did that, they proved their value, but more importantly, the business saw the value. In fact, the demand for more automations went up throughout the year, and we had to fund more in order to keep that going. But because we did that, we can now meet the current demand of the business that they've had is they are all moving remote. They're seeing a lot more opportunities for automation. So we're going to expand our offerings to include business defined and enabled automations. So that's one. The second is building process with Atlassian tools. So using our own collaboration tools is a foundation to remote work. It's helped us manage the impact to this workforce. We've worked closely with the people teams, use Confluence and Jira Service Desk to manage the process. We've also improved the ways that our teams are working together using our tools and creating some visibility into that across different teams, because we're learning that we need to make sure we maintain that visibility and transparency amongst our teams to make sure everybody knows what's going on. The third would be being a cloud-first IT shop. I would say we're about a 95% cloud-based IT shop, give or take. This has really served us well in this kind of situation, and we'll continue that shift and that focus of cloud. And then last, putting the people first. I know this can be a big adjustment. Our people leaders need to show empathy and understanding, and our leaders have shown a tremendous amount of that. So even though some of these things are really working well, we're going to double down. We still remain very focused on our IT employees, making sure that their health and their families are number one, and just being flexible in our work to make sure that we're supporting as much as we can. That won't change that won't change for us in IT.
That all sounds really great. I mean, is there anything that you feel like didn't work well?
Yeah, I can think of a few things that didn't work well, or maybe I wouldn't want to repeat the experience. When we first got into this, into these working groups to say, hey, this might be coming up, let's plan for how we're going to do some of our basic hardware distribution, for example, in this new environment. we got into a risk management meeting and we discussed ideas around what we'll do. So if session just happens, what will we do? And we actually had 3 contingency plans for getting laptops to people in every location. And within a week, we had burned through all those ideas. So we had to come up with contingency plan, whoever thought this was going to happen. It's just a matter of you can be as prepared as you think you are, and then something happens that throws that all out the window. So I wouldn't say we didn't do a great job preparing, but you just can't plan for everything that's going to happen. So keeping the collaboration going and the ideation going on making sure that IT is set up to work is super important.
Yeah, sounds like you have to be a little agile and open to changing quickly. Is there anything you recommend other IT leaders think about as a result of this kind of massive shift in the way we're working?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can get the theme of where I'm going with what we've been learning over the last 5 or 6 weeks, but the loading up on communication and collaboration tools and platforms and practices is just super important. As teams leverage Zoom more or webinars for things like company meeting, the usage goes up. We saw 5 times the increase, or almost 5 times the increase just in the first week of our town hall. So thinking about the load on all your systems is really getting to be important. We're seeing people use tools that weren't super popular before. So maintaining visibility on who's using what licenses we have, what access they have, et cetera, has been something we need to think about pretty much weekly at this point. Fiscal planning is also something to think about. It's going to be a challenge, I think, for IT teams this year to do their fiscal year plannings, given the level of uncertainty that we have in the macro environment. And fiscal planning is usually a pretty big exercise. IT budgets tend to be quite complex, and they have long-term implications, long-term commitments in there. Even in an agile IT shop like we are, we have a pretty complex budget. So at Atlassian IT, what we do is differentiate our portfolio into 4 areas. We have investments for running business as usual. We have investments to help the company scale. We have investments to help the company transform. And then we set aside money for incubation. Like I mentioned last year, it was about 5%. Our CIO will set targets for that every year, given on how we want to move the needle at Atlassian and what our company objectives are. So this year, and like I mentioned, we're in fiscal year planning right now. Our targets will probably be different than previous years, but we still want to balance within these targets. But having that framework allowed us to jump right into scenario planning within each of those areas. And it helped some of the planning is going relatively smoothly considering all the challenges in the environment. So fiscal planning will be different. The last is just on some mindset shifts. So sometimes IT teams want everything to be perfect before we go live. In this case, given the how we're working, good enough can work. And so we don't have the luxury of time when doing some of the things like we've had to do over the last few weeks. So we've learned to challenge each other and ask, is this good enough or is this good enough now? So that mindset shift has been happening. Also, the impact of all this can get overwhelming for IT. So our CIO is always reminding us to focus on things we can control. Not everything is going to be in our realm of control in IT, and that's okay. We can manage well if we focus on what's in control. Yeah. So those are the things that I think other IT leaders are going to be thinking about, some of the big buckets of things that they'll have to think about over the next few years, or few months, hopefully a few months.
I hope.
Put that on the universe.
Yeah, no, that's really great. Those are all the questions that I have for you. So thank you so much. I found that to be super insightful, and I hope everybody on the webinar found the learnings from our IT team useful as well. So I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience now. If you have a question and you haven't submitted it in the Q&A box already, go ahead and do so. And just give us a couple of minutes here for Jenna to sort of go through the questions and see what she can answer. So just hang tight for a second while we do that. Yeah, I see one. I was actually going to mention this, so I'll bring up
Michael had a question around security and the people, process, and technology. That's a great question. It could be a whole webinar Q&A itself. It's a top of mind IT concern as it is. Right now, working from home, it's turned into something super critical. We at Atlassian had some timing on our side on this one. We have fairly recently put a zero trust policy in place for all of our devices. And so we have a trusted, every device on our network is a trusted device, and we put into place security protocols to manage that, as well as the access for employees. Almost like assuming that everybody was a work from home employee, because we have such different needs across geographies and who's working at home. So that's really helped us, I would say, in the timing wise, without having a zero trust policy in place that was 100% compliant and had everybody onboarded onto that. Has been really lucky for us. One of the things I'd put in the nice job column, that's for sure. Jessica's asking a question: do I feel the demands and expectations on the IT team by managers and engineers has changed since going remote, with everyone having their own schedule? Problems can come up during non-business hours. Have you had to adjust SLAs? It depends. I know that's a pretty answer. Do you feel the demands and expectation on IT teams has certainly changed? I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mentioned that being supporting our end users over chat has been something that we've offered to, because some questions are pretty quick, and not to have everybody open a ticket to be able to ask a question has been one. And sometimes if we do it in the chat, and depending on who's online, they can answer the chat. So we've been able to do that. Some SLAs are just non-negotiable. So I mentioned closing the quarter. That is something that we have to do no matter what. So the team did a lot of work to prep for that. In other cases, I say the way that we're managing it is with that relationship, ruthlessly prioritizing with our business partners to say, right now, what's the most important thing that we could do? Maybe not every team works on everything that they were working on before the situation. Maybe some teams have to prioritize within their space. Maybe other teams can take on different work. We've done some minor reassignment of folks if they're needed to help out in another team. So we've been pretty flexible with that. And then the other thing is recognize, as a people manager in particular, your employee to employee IT employees might be different. Their needs and what they're working on, and what they're dealing with at home. So as a manager, I think the demands are quite high, making sure that you are managing your people, that you're working with your peers to understand what's going on, keeping the transparency up between teams, and then working within your business partners to manage that prioritization of work, so that you can focus on what's business critical right now. Has been a big one. Let's see. Let's see. What are your best practices? Yogesh is asking, what are your best practices, top 3 to working across international time zones? To work across international time zones. This is a Jenna opinion, just because I think IT deals with this quite a bit. There's a few things that we do as IT teams to make sure that people are included. And I will say that at Atlassian, one of our values is open, and that's really helped us out when you approach working within your company as an open. It helps everybody quickly want to do the right thing to make sure that, and we also have a value on playing as a team. So with those things, one of the things that we recommend in our IT teams is to rotate meetings. So where it gets hard is if you have more than 2 time zones, usually 3 or 4, it gets quite hard to find a time that works for everybody. Depending on where those time zones are at, you often can't. So someone has to work early or work late. So we rotate that. It helps spread the pain, so that not one person is always super early or super late. So we do that. The second thing is we try to not have more than 3 time zones, to be honest. Like having an IT team with 4 time zones is really hard to manage. And I think that puts a lot of strain on everybody. It's okay for small, short-lived teams, but if it's a persistent team that's running a business as usual process, that's just too much to ask of employees in the long term. We see a lot of burnout when that happens. So try to keep it less than 3 time zones. The third thing is for individual contributors and frontline managers, depending on how large your IT organization is, we like them to be co-located. And we like most of the team to be at least in the same geography. So we don't want a manager and a team to have one employee in a different geography. That kind of puts them on a virtual island. Although everybody's in a virtual island right now, I think in normal operations, that is hard for a team, and it's not a super warm and fuzzy feeling to have one person over in a different location. And then the last I would say is the communication, live scribing in meetings as much as possible, opening up a Confluence page, because that's what we use, or any other tool that you have, so everybody can see the words, especially when you're dealing with a lot of different languages in a company. That helps everybody stay on the same page, literally. And communicating as much as possible within the remote teams. Because we document everything, it helps our new IT employees onboard pretty quickly. We have a really good, rich written history of projects and what's been working. We have a blogging culture, so people share a lot, and people are able to onboard quickly. And then people can work offline and do a lot of asynchronous collaboration when they use the remote collaboration tools. And that helps everybody communicate with, even when they're in a more restrictive, when can I work, when can I be online because of what's going on now, or just because I work in a general global team. So those are I think US 3 I gave you 4.
Let's take a couple more if you can.
Yes, let's see. It's an anonymous attendee. Now that we're all remote, what do you think about going back to in-office work? What would be the disadvantages? I'm assuming you're thinking advantages and disadvantages there. Going back to office in work. Well, I think there's been a lot of conversation. Our workplace experience team, I know, has been talking about what does life look like. Here, I work in the Mountain View office in the Bay Area. We were one of the earliest in the countries to do a work from home. So we've been dealing with this since the beginning of March and have had the opportunity to think, what does it mean when we all go back to work? I think that will depend on the health and safety protocols that come out of our local and federal governments. That will be a big change. I think some of the advantages, I will pivot the question a little bit and say, I think some of the advantages of being remote, or being a global company that was in an office and then everybody's remote and then going back to the offices, it's made us aware of a lot of things. Molly, you guys have probably seen this as well. Like what we've been doing with remote employees or geographically distributed teams is kind of amplified. Like I personally have noticed how exhausted I am by Friday after doing like 40 or 50 Zoom calls during the week, right? It's a lot. It takes a lot. For the first time in my career, I actually had to go in and block lunch. I've never done that. And I'm fairly old, so that tells you how long I've never done that. Because I found we were just back to back to back, and I didn't even get 15 minutes to go eat. So there's some things I think that made us aware of what it's like to be that person who works with a team and you're remote, or that person who's on a small task or project and you're the one person in a different geography. I think that has been a big thing to help us all culturally adjust, for sure. Some of the things that we've also done is some team building things that have been great, because we've just missed, and we like working with each other, and so we just miss it. I've seen teams do virtual coffee hours. They've done trivia games over Zoom. We had a background competition. We did a walking competition at Atlassian, and just some of these things were great practices to do to keep teams feeling as part of a team. I think that's that's a disadvantage of being remote for sure. But because we've all been in this situation, there has been so much creative thinking going on how to keep everybody working as a team. That's a company-wide thing.
Mm-hmm. Let's take one more, maybe. There's a lot of questions here, but
there are a lot of questions. Can you talk more, let's see, generally from Caroline, how you measure success once a project's completed? Oh, that is a question that is close to my heart, Caroline. I think I mentioned the people, process, and technology piece is how we think about things when we're deploying. I remember back in the day, IT was all about the go live date. Like everything was around that date, especially for large projects. They were complex. They were a lot of custom builds. They were on-prem. You had to buy hardware. You had release calendars to manage. So like all those things were teed up to get to your big go live date. And that's what IT was driven by for the longest time was, did you hit the go live date or did you not hit the go live date? And with cloud and with our agile practices and just the speed of change in the enterprise today, I just don't think that's a success factor anymore. And it's been a bit of a change. I think some IT teams have taken a little longer to get that, because then the question is what Caroline's asking, which is, well, then what is success if it's not that? And so the way that we've been driving success is to upfront have the teams think about, number one, what is the business capability you're enabling? So we have an enterprise architecture team in IT that is making sure that our systems and our architecture is built for a company for 3 years from now. So what do we need to do? What scaling do we need to have? What type of capabilities do we need to offer for a company 3 years from now? Because of that, we think in terms of business capabilities. So what capabilities do we offer today? Do they meet that threshold of being viable in 3 years? What don't we offer and what do we probably need to get to? That capability language helps us prioritize, and it helps us think about the change of that. For sure. The second thing that we do is when we're standing up new projects, we run everything. We have a process for doing that. And at one point in the process, once we get to a certain level of, yeah, we think we want to do this, we have IT teams build what we call an IT project poster. And this is actually a play you can check out on our playbook at Atlassian.com. The IT project poster is a way for project teams to define the problem they're trying to solve, explain what solutions are going through their head, start positioning what they'll need in order to make that successful, where their dependency are, what they think the risks are, et cetera. And we specifically make sure that they're articulating the business outcome that they're trying to achieve with this, and they do it with their business partners. The success that we'll measure them on is, did they achieve that outcome? Because that outcome that the business was looking to achieve themselves is the reason we're putting that capability in place. So we try to get them to articulate that early in the process as possible, and to make sure that everybody tests that theory and that it's sound. It's not easy. I'm making it sound pretty like it was a pretty rapid transition. It's been a journey for us to do that, but I would check out the project poster. The one I have online is a little bit of a simplified version of what we do. We ask for an architecture check and a couple other things in there, but it's a good place to start.
Great. There are a bunch more questions. I'll try and answer them on communities. So maybe on the community threads, and we can get these questions up there. But I think that's all the time that we have. Thank you to Jenna so much. This was really wonderful, and to everybody for joining. Don't forget to check out our other ITSM webinar later this afternoon. And then also there's 3 really great sessions tomorrow for IT operations. So go ahead and register for those. But thank you all so much for joining, and thanks, Jenna.
Thanks everyone.